turns out that Lord Hans Capon has a very strong vice for drinking and women. According to several of the Rete Guard, he might not go hunting for a week. Nightingale seemed fairly sympathetic to Henry's new job. He wouldn't speak ill of the Lord, but he certainly didn't pity Henry for his new station. Henry needed to find something to fill his time. If he was idle too long, he would start to think of Skalitz. Peshek had found a buyer for the gold and silver and jewels. Smill, the horse breeder and a trader in Neuhof, was interested in the lot for a fine saddle for Lord Capon, even. If Henry was shrewd enough, he might even be able to trade for a horse. This would make his endeavors much easier, especially with this upcoming hunting trip. Henry set out at first light. Teresa and Peshek were still sleeping. The dog, Mutt, that had followed them from Skalitz, started following Henry again. It was rather bothersome at first, but Henry grew to enjoy the company of Mutt. It took the better part of the morning, nearing noon when he had arrived at Neuhof. Henry tried to come up with a new name for the dog, but Mutt didn't seem to want to respond to anything other than, well, Mutt. Henry started to take in the sights of Neuhof, which was quite the village, and the stables were a sight to behold. Henry met with Smill, but his wife, Zora, she handled the negotiations with Henry, as Smill had a pressing matter with a favored mare who'd gone lame. Zora was agreeable enough, but she was certainly a shrewd negotiator. She was even willing to purchase the poppies and marigolds that Henry had picked along his way. When they started negotiating for the jewels and precious metals, Henry asked about a horse, to which she lit up at the idea of a trade, and Henry walked through the stables with her. She had offered a few horses to Henry, one named Trojan, another Epona. They had fine steeds indeed, not that Henry really knew much about horses, but they looked strong and well-fed. None of them seemed to catch his eye, and he was certainly nervous around them, and as a result, they were nervous around him. He wandered through a pasture as Zora needed to speak with the wife of one of the farmhands. As Henry was walking towards a large horse with a dark chestnut coat and white facial markings, it seemed very unbothered by his presence. When Henry tried talking to it, it raised its large head and dropped it up and down like a big nod. Henry felt calmer and approached it with confidence. It reared its large head as if to sniff him, and it bit him. He recoiled. It reared its head and stomped off. Zora could be heard laughing. Henry cursed under his breath, and Mutt took a run after the horse. It didn't look like Mutt was trying to harm it, but it looked like the two were playing, almost. Henry didn't seem to think he was going to find a horse at this rate. And, well, maybe he should stick with Coin. He had 2 feet, after all. As he walked back towards Zora, the horse started after him. Henry turned. It stopped. He raised his hand to try to pet it. It tried to nip him again. This time, Henry got a swat in on its broad nose, which the horse stomped off in a big circle, which got Mutt to prancing after it. The horse swung its head at Mutt, as Mutt barked, and the two did a big circle once more. Henry continued walking towards Zora. "He likes you, and your hound," she laughed. "He's got a funny way of showing it," Henry retorted. The horse came back for a few more rounds, and Henry had to smile. Smill had returned, and Zora filled him in on the possible trade. "Let him take that bloody beast," he snorted. Zora had given Smill a dark stare, more of a shut up sort of look. "He's valuable only if someone can ride him, and he bites everyone that tries. He seems to like the boy. Get rid of him. The hands will sing your praises later." Smil gave his wife a kiss on the cheek and left. Zora was obviously flustered. Henry knew I could get more for that look when he saw one. He often gave it to his father at the... Well, he often gave it to his father when he was alive. Bucephalus is his name. He's stubborn, brave. The horse wandered back up to Henry. This time, he was able to stroke its large cheek. As Henry stroked its large cheek, he introduced himself, and the two seemed to get on for a moment. When Zora spoke up, "Now there's a mount for a conqueror, strong as an ox and loyal. Now, I suppose you'll be needing a saddle and tack for him. That will be extra." Henry hadn't thought of that. He didn't have a lot of groschen. He had seen the warm forge on the way to the fields, and Henry asked if they needed help around the forge, as he could forge some horseshoes and nails. His father had done it, after all, or sharpen tools, or even craft them. Zora's eyes lit up at the opportunity. She led Henry to the forge, where the farrier was snoring. Somehow, over the smell of the burning coal, you could smell the liquor off the man. The coals were at least hot, and Henry set to stoking the fire and heating the metal. Zora wanted to see a finished product from Henry first. It took a little time to get the iron to temperature, given the forge was only warm, but he fashioned a general shape with holes for nails and a fairly quick pace. He cooled the shoe and offered it to her to have a look. "I made them like the way Father used to," is all he had to say. The shoes having several notches and flat parts to curl over the hoof. She looked very impressed. "Make as many as you can by the evening, and I'll even feed you supper," she said as she wandered off, and Henry went to work. At some point, the farrier woke and was frustrated to see Henry, but set to sharpening tools and drinking. Henry was finishing his fourth set of shoes when Zora led a rather petulant Bucephalus to the forge. He had been saddled with a modest but very plain saddle and bridle. There were at least some saddlebags. Henry didn't know the full value of it all, but, well, he had traded his time and she had given him a saddle. But he was certain that Zora had gotten the better end of this deal. Henry cleaned up a little and mounted his horse. Bucephalus didn't make it easy. He was very tall and wide, and he moved a bit as Henry tried. "He didn't buck you?" she said, astonished. Henry's eyes were wide and stunned, going a little pale. "Come, we have dinner ready in the courtyard." Henry rode his horse to the main gates, hitching him by a post. Dinner was a hearty stew and bun, which Henry ate happily. There was still daylight, and apparently an inn which he could make for before dark, which would give him a good jump on getting to Kohelnitz Mill. Henry thought he would be a good opportunity to deliver the ring, and then maybe the rest of the day of resting before the hunt. Henry chose to lead Bucephalus for a time, walking side by side with the horse as they made their way for the inn. He walked until his feet got sore, then mounted Bucephalus. The large horse didn't seem too bothered with Henry, but did drop his head from time to time to try to nip at mutt or snag some sweet grasses. Henry would pull back on the reins, and they would do a circle or two. They would need to come to an understanding eventually. The inn came into sight, and before long Henry was paying a stable boy to take care of the horse and mutt. Henry reserved a room for the night, and with what little coin he had left, perhaps some dice, which did not go very well. He would do okay with some rounds, buying drink and food, and then poorly others, and then some man came in who, well, took Henry for all that he had, and Henry went to bed rather defeated. Mutt had slept at the foot of the bed in the inn. Henry awoke late, but he had the best sleep he'd had in a long time. Must have been having Mutt with him. that had done it. Henry did not get a good jump on the day, and with his loss at dice the night before, he was feeling the pinch. He wandered down from the rooms and found the man who had bested him at dice slumped against the wall on a bench, passed out. Henry got a devilish grin. Picking the man up, he was very out of it, and grumbled about what was going on. "I'm just going to help you to bed." The man grumbled an okay. While Henry was carrying him, he patted him down, finding the coin purse. Lifting it from him, the man had made a healthy amount of groschen, not only Henry's but others, and his dice was in the pouch. And Henry decided to help himself to those. He left him a little bit of groschen. He slipped out of the room, closing the door behind him. The stable boy helped Henry put the saddle on Bucephalus. Henry enjoyed the routine, the brushing and fitting. The boy was keen to make sure the horse and mutt were well fed, and Henry gave him some of the lifted groschen as payment. The boy was ecstatic and gave Henry a less traveled route to get to the mill from the Inn Before the Glade, it was called. The ride was certainly an eventful one. A young nobleman challenged him to a duel to death. Turns out his mother was obsessed with knights and wanted him to become one, so she sent him out to get some experience. Henry convinced him to find himself a virgin maiden first. The young man seemed to be a lost cause. Nice, but a lost cause. Further along the way, another man challenged him to a duel, this time for coin, not to death. Henry participated. It was long and a difficult fight, but very valuable experience. And Henry was the victor eventually, more so probably out of boredom from the other man who, well, it seemed that they would just trade blow for blow and block for block and wasn't really going anywhere. But Henry thought of it as a win was a win, climbed back on his horse and continued on. And at the next crossroads, under a large tree, a woman was crouched, crying. Henry was rather beside himself and not quite sure what he should do. Everything screamed to him that this was a trap, but he spoke to her. Something about her seemed familiar. Sure enough, she was a maiden from Skalitz. Not just that, but, well, she had had some illegitimate children and wasn't necessarily welcome amongst the civilized folk. She had found a place to squat and live with her children in the forests outside of Rete, and all she was really after was something to eat. Henry offered her some coin and some smoked sausage that he had pilfered from the inn. Henry went about his way, on down to the mill of Kohelnitz, at which Miller Woyzik was something else, young, very quick to speak. And when Henry had explained who he was and handed him the ring, he looked at it, laughed, and threw it against the wall. Henry was astonished and very angry. He had gone to so much to get that ring, and he just threw it away. The ring is nothing. The ring was just to test the mettle of the one that was to deliver. It was nothing but a test. Henry was very upset, but the miller had a job. Miller offered Henry Miller had a job that was easy enough to do, to steal 5 Waffenrocks, the colors of the city guard of Talmberg. Henry's eyes flashed at the thought. The reasoning was some guard was getting payback against the guard captain, and Henry asked if it was redeem, and the miller's eyes darted. It had to have been. Henry accepted, but he wasn't quite sure when he would get the opportunity, but it didn't seem to be a time-sensitive manner. Henry went along the river's path, taking his time to enjoy the sound of the water as he returned to the mill. He thought maybe if he had time he would speak with Teresa and tell of his journey that he had had the day before. The evening and dinner was rather pleasant when he had returned to the mill. Peshek had all sorts of questions and inspected the horse, and seems to think that Henry actually made a pretty good deal, all things considered, which made Henry feel better. He didn't tell him that he had made a bunch of horseshoes, just in case. It was early in the morning when Henry made his way up to the castle to meet with Lord Capon for the hunt. The city guard was moving slow and didn't seem to pay Henry much mind, almost not even looking up at him as he rode through on his horse. Definitely none of the neighbors from Skalitz even looked his way, only putting their heads low and their hands higher. Henry rode past them, not having much to really spare after his last few days, but having much, much more than any of them. He made his way to the upper castle, and to no one's surprise, Lord Capon wasn't quite up yet. He hitched his horse and sat for a while talking with a few of the guards. Lord Capon arrived and had a few servants in tow, carrying his supplies and bow and arrows and all the things he would need for his hunt. They set to getting his horse prepared. Lord Capon spoke with someone that Henry didn't quite know, but he looked important. Capon turned to Henry and asked him, "Well, blacksmith's boy, do you have a horse?" He laughed, almost with jest. Henry nodded his head, rather pleased, motioning towards Bucephalus. "I do, Lord." "You have a horse?" Lord Capon was flabbergasted, and from the looks of it, quite impressed. He seemed very pleased that they wouldn't have to go at a slow pace for the hunt. If we don't have to walk, or rather you don't have to walk, we could maybe go to the woods near Talmberg. Lord Capon seemed lost in his thoughts. Lord Capon, perhaps we could ride for those woods near Talmberg. Maybe we could go to Talmberg itself. It's rather embarrassing, but I do still need to apologize to Sir Robard for putting him and his men in danger, and I'm sure I'm in for an earful from Sir Divish. Lord Capon got a devilish grin. "Oh, an opportunity to see you put in your place by another nobleman. Well, that is too good to pass up. Come, blacksmith's boy, let's ride for Talmberg." As Henry approached his horse. "What is that?" Capon exclaimed. "Is that your horse?" Henry looked rather confused at Bucephalus and then to Capon. "Is something the matter with him?" "He's enormous," Capon laughed, watching Henry approach his horse with amusement. "Well, let us be off." Capon had hardly waited for Henry to even get settled on his horse before the young lord set off for the gates. He wasn't dressed as flashy as he normally would have been, and Henry thought that might have been to keep a low profile. All the better yet, Henry supposed. The ride was pleasant enough. There wasn't any issues to speak of, and Lord Capon certainly knew his way around the countryside. I suppose he ought to. He is the lord of the area, after all. Henry felt that they had maybe saved a considerable amount of time with Capon's navigation, and Talberg was not much further on. was an enormous windmill on a hill, and Henry asked if they could stop and look at it. Henry'd never had an opportunity to see one up close before. The miller had farm hands and a lovely young maiden that caught the capon's eye, and they were very kind to receive them. For a few groschen, they watered and fed the horses, while the owner and talked about the construction of the mill. It was all rather fascinating, save for the simple lad that kept interrupting with various questions. Both Henry and Lord Capon looked at one another with a smirk. The actual size of this simpleton was incredible. He seemed nice enough. Perhaps the term gentle giant came from this lad. The nobleman was getting frustrated, trying to accommodate Lord Capon and deal with the simple young man. Henry mentioned the hour perhaps being late, and they had a ways to go before Talmberg. They quickly departed on their way. Talmberg was really a short jaunt, maybe half a league or so downhill, which went uneventful and pleasant. A pair of soldiers rode up on the two of them, and they were not so kind until they realized that it was the Lord of Rattay and a page. They offered an escort, which Capon begrudgingly accepted, and as they got close to the city beneath the castle, one of the soldiers made various hand signals. They shared that it was to let the castle know a person of an import had arrived. Perhaps we should let the Lord bathe down at the river with the maidens? To freshen up, of course, before he meets with the Lord and Lady. Lord Capon looked to Henry with a pleased and surprised expression. Why, Henry, that is certainly a lovely idea. I wouldn't want to meet with the Lord and Lady with all this road smell on me. What a marvelous page you've turned out to be. And you should send word ahead for my accommodations. It will also give them time to prepare, and then bring me back some wine, dear blacksmith's boy. The soldiers stayed with Capon while Henry went up to the castle. There was certainly a buzz happening as the guards were running all about. The stablemaster took Henry's horse without giving him a second look. In all the buzz, Henry pulled his sleeping bundle and slipped into the crowd and found his way to the guardhouse. His heart was pounding. Right now was probably not the best time, but no one was looking at him. He entered the guardhouse beside the main portcullis and started rummaging through the chests. They were oddly all unlocked. There was thundering feet that had stomped up in the room above him. He continued looking quietly, finally finding a bundle of waffen rocks, all folded neatly. He unrolled his sleeping blankets, laying the waffen rocks down in the middle, and tightly rolled them back up. The talking and clamoring above him was quite loud, and he tried to time his footsteps on the ladder rungs. As he was making his way for the door, the hinges squealed something fierce. He didn't notice it earlier. Perhaps he was too busy trying to look like he belonged. "Who's down there?" roared Sir Robart's voice. It's me, Henry, of Skalitz. I was told you wanted to speak with me?" Henry's heart was pounding. "Henry!" He paused. "Oh, right. Come up here, my boy." Henry started climbing the rungs. He was certainly caught off guard. "You're alive. It's good to see you on your feet, and well, you certainly gave us a fright." "Yes, about that," Henry started to stammer. "That's not important. I'll see you on the training field on the morrow. But first, did you really come here with Lord Capon?" "Yes, sir. Sir Hanush made me Lord Capon's page. We're going hunting." Henry nodded. His bedroll tightly snugged up against his back. The door down below swung open and shut, and feet thundered through. "Lord Capon's page? Well, you're certainly moving up in the world. Never seen someone land in shit and smell of daisies." Sir Robard laughed. "Lady Stephanie asked if I were to see you again to send you her way. She has a request for you, lad." At that, Robard turned and barked orders. Henry walked out of the guardhouse from up above and wandered along the ramparts with purpose, but also leisurely, not believing that he had just gotten away with the heist. His heart was pounding, and he felt so alive. He made it into the upper floor of the castle, where Henry learned that Lady Stephanie had been waiting in her bedchambers. He thought it odd, but no one else seemed to. He lightly rapped on the door, but left it open when he was invited in. She was doing some stitching and looked very happy to see him. She gave him a quick scolding for his running off to Skalitz and almost getting himself killed. As she spoke, he looked about the lavish room and something caught his eye. Tucked under one of the blankets, almost in a bundle, but hanging out just enough, a familiar red fabric. Was that Sir Radzig's insignia? What was Sir Radzig's embroidery doing in her bedchambers? She had requested of Henry to get some wine from Rote, a crown from, or some such thing from Sasau, and a horse from Ushitz. Ushitz. He could maybe see if he could start to learn how to read while there. He wasn't really listening to her as he should have, but none of the people would be hard to find. Lady Stephanie sent me for, and certainly he would find who he needed to find. His mind was preoccupied with the embroidered clothing. He went on his way and catching a servant and asked them for some wine for Lord Capon, which was quickly provided a bottle. Henry went down to the baths, his heart still pounding. He walked past all the guards. Lord Capon was being bathed and entertained by a young maiden when Henry brought in the wine. He was quickly dismissed and told to wash up as well. One of the maidens was quick to pull him into another room. Henry tried to decline, but she wasn't paying him much attention. And, well, he was still very exhilarated from his successful heist that he let his baser instincts take hold. Maybe a quick bath with an eager maiden would do him some good. They had time until the formal dinner, and Henry started getting caught up in the moment. He grabbed hold of the woman with a fervor. She let out a thrilled shriek, which received a cheer from Lord Capon on the other side of the wall, and then the sounds of competition. And Henry wouldn't be bested by the young lord.